Well, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Swingman podcast. It's podcast number 124. As ever, I'm your host, Jordan Ledger, joined as I am all the time by Louis Halpin and Lewis Howard. And that is a wrap for the NBA season. The NBA finals are done. Denver defeat Miami 4-1 in the finals. I've got to say, some of us might have predicted it, but maybe not in the manner of which it happened. But before we jump into all of that, let me ask you two, how are you doing? Are you well? Are you good? Have you melted in this UK heat that some Americans on Twitter have been taking the mickey out of us for?
Yeah, it's absolutely baking. People, I think, who aren't from the UK don't realise that everything's built for slightly moderate or slightly rainy weather, and every time it goes to either of the extremes, everything falls apart. So it is pretty bad over heat-wise, but could be worse. Got to see the Nuggets win. Jokic gets Finals MVP. I was rooting for him. I know, George, you must be having a tough time. The playoffs haven't been the greatest for your boys, put it that way.
No, I mean, I don't. It could have gone better for me. I'm not angry at the situation. I don't hate Nikola Jokic, but it could have gone better. But it's what it is. Louis, how do you feel about everything? How are you feeling today? How are you yourself first before we get on to NBA? Are you well?
Yeah, I'm okay. Pretty busy recently, but been managing to keep up with everything. I will say, I think like likening the sort of heat in the UK, sort of like the atmosphere, shall we say, at the Mile High City in Denver. Until you've experienced it, you can't say.
The altitude. we can't compete. This is what
exactly.
What we're saying, right?
You can't say until you've experienced it, basically. But it's going to be a struggle to get through this one with the heat. But I'm sure we'll plug through.
Indeed, we will. We'll get through it. But I mean, right. So let's just jump straight into it in terms of the series itself, because we haven't spoken since the finals came about. We signed off just before the start of it, and we wasn't sure if we was going to do a pod in between or not. But alas, we're here, and we're going to review our brackets and everything, and run through a few questions towards the whole of the NBA playoffs and also the season in question. We'll put it in a microwave and we'll talk about a few things. But the series itself, were there any surprises in how it played out? Because for me, I think this is one of the of everything that's happened in the playoffs, this is probably the most fundamental or rudimental. I'm trying to think of the word for it. What everyone could have predicted happening pretty much did happen.
Yeah, I reckon most people, if you'd have asked them before the series started, I think the one that would have come out the most would have been a 4-1. So in that sense, it was what we thought. I think most people thought that Jokic, would get his, and he did. Obviously, it was in different ways. We saw, they tried to restrict him as a playmaker in some of the games, especially towards the tail end. And that is one thing I think got highlighted by the Nuggets throughout this playoffs, is how much people maybe underrate the value of playmaking and how much it generates such a higher level of offense than someone who just, plain out scorer, for example, let's say. It just offers so many different ways to win the game, and that's why you see someone like an Aaron Gordon have the game that he did and Bruce Brown have some of the games that he did. And that, I think, was just the tail of the tape, really. You had players all over that Nuggets team that could step up when needed. And then you looked at the Heat team, and although they had some big performances in some of the games, and Bam, I think, was pretty consistent throughout, maybe could have been a bit more aggressive and could have made some more shots closer to the rim. But at the end of the day, Denver was just a more talented team who could win games in more ways.
Yeah, I think it says all it needs to in terms of, there was the one game that Miami won, right? Second game in Denver. And, there was a pretty, unanimous discourse on that game in terms of they made Nikola Jokic be a scorer, took away the other guys not making shots. I think maybe one of my biggest surprises from the series is that Michael Porter Jr. really didn't perform at any point throughout the series on a consistent basis. He hit one-off shots. In the go-home game last night. But, guys like that sometimes weren't hitting for Denver. And then particularly in that second game. But they had ways to respond to sort of the different things that Miami were throwing at them in terms of, that zone that really stifled the Boston Celtics before in the Eastern Conference Finals. Denver were kind of able to go to the next game and pick that apart, really drop Jokic a little bit closer to the post, which just opened up a few more things. Obviously, I think the cheat code here is we can talk about the ball movement, the fantastic sort of like sharing and distribution that comes with a guy like Jokic, who's pretty like a very unselfish superstar. I think at the end of the day, though, they could always just ban that 2-man game between Jokic and Jamal Murray, which just, I think, was something that the Miami Heat couldn't overcome, particularly when their best player wasn't at his best. I think he looked a bit, inhibited by his physical ailments that he'd sort of, I think, kind of accumulated throughout the playoffs. There's been a couple of occasions where he'd look a bit banged up, and truth be told, he didn't really have a great game. I'm talking about Jimmy Butler, obviously. Didn't really have a great game since the first game of the Eastern Conference Finals. So there was that element to it. And then also, which is kind of the sad thing now, because this is what people will be left with, the image of that the guys like Caleb Martin, Gabe Vincent, and Max Strus, they sort of came crashing back down to reality, the type of players we kind of know them as opposed to the players they had been for a lot of the playoffs. They'd been performing at a spectacular level, which really wasn't them, if I'm quite honest.
It was eventually, I mean, you can look at it in the two ways of that they've failed when it really mattered in the finals, or you can look at it of that like it was unbelievable how they've got themselves to the finals.
That's what I choose to look
how
at
you
it.
bubble it into, yeah.
But in any case, I think we're saying there is that those players had a ceiling to get to, and I think in the series before they reached that ceiling and they just couldn't go any further against a team that was just better prepared, better defensively, were bigger. I think that was something that no other team in the East really exploited against them, is that Miami had a pretty physical disadvantage in terms of height and size and power. So I think they won't be feeling this way, obviously, but I think they can really take sort of pride, the Miami Heat, I should say, in getting this far, because I think that's a win in itself, really.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to be a shame for some of them. Obviously, now this is the second NBA Finals that they'd have lost, like for Jimmy, for Bam, and a few of the others. But the way in which their season, if they'd have gone into it realistically, I know there's going to be all this talk about how Jimmy was like, yeah, we'll do it in 4, we'll do it in 3, and it's 3 to go, and all of this stuff. But if you'd have offered him an NBA Finals, I think 2 or so weeks before the playoffs started, I think they'd have bit your hand off for it, especially after losing that first playing game. So there's positives to take from it. A lot of the guys from this Heat team that are the quote-unquote role players are going to be getting paid this year or next year, essentially, is what's going to happen for them. And like you've mentioned before, Louis, Duncan Robinson now is no longer negative equity. So there's a few things of which there's positives to come from it in terms of the future for Miami.
Yeah, I think on that as well, I would say that like those guys with the coaching of Spoelstra with I hate the term heat culture, but there is something to that.
It's come about too much.
Yeah. When you see these guys go to other teams, I mean, like, sort of like a Derek Jones Jr. type, a Goran Dragic, I know he's kind of at the end, but they go to these other teams and they're not nearly as good or productive as they were for Miami. And I think that's down to the coaching of Spoelstra and the positions that these players are placed in. Because of that, they make the most of what they have, but I think they just needed a little bit more, and they don't have it on this occasion, but we'll see going forward, I guess. No Tyler Hero as well, I would say. That's
no Tyler Hero. It's a big one. I don't think ultimately, though, it's something where it's not like if CP3 didn't get injured, or you never know what could have happened. It's not in that debate. It's just it could have closed the gap a bit, and who knows? But I don't think it would have shifted the needle in any case. I think Denver just ultimately are way too strong. You need sort of 2 or 3 players of Tyler Hero's level on the field to compete with that Miami squad with Denver's is how I'd see it. The question before we jump into our predictions, we'll have a look at what actually happened as the bracket and what we predicted ultimately, as well as a threesome of what our ideas were together. What I do want to say is this Denver squad and this roster, how it's assembled, is it able to sort of go on a back-to-back, a three-peat? Has it got that in it, do you feel? Or do you feel like this was Denver's window and they've taken it? Lewis, I'll throw that one to you.
I think it's definitely, this wasn't just Denver's window. I think this is the opening of what should be a few years where they will be in title contention. You look at the squad and the ages of all the players, especially Jamal Murray and Jokic, obviously, because they're the cornerstones, and they're both entering their prime now. They've got, I think it's only Bruce Brown who's looking like, he might leave or not, depends what contract he gets offered and whether Denver wants to match him. So they should definitely be there next year. And the way that organisation is run, the two main players and the sort of, he talks about heat culture. Jokic talks about, having a family in Denver when he was getting interviewed after getting Finals MVP. And I think they are set up to be successful for the next few years.
Yeah, I'm going to agree as well, because I look at it from two perspectives. I think, that'd be a big loss if they lost Bruce Brown, because I think he's been fantastic in the playoffs. But I feel like, I'm not sure if this was a real masterclass really in like roster construction for Denver. Like, I'm not sure if they've got some good players around Jokic, but I feel like it may be more of a case of this guy can make the best of whatever he's given. Like, he can make everyone around him better. Know what matter the skill set. It's just because they know if they cut, if they get themselves open, he'll make the pass and he can score. And it's just like there's so many ways to kill a team with this guy. So that will always be in there, no matter what sort of role players come and go. But they need to keep that core of MPJ. He'll get better. I think the experience it will only benefit him. I thought Aaron Gordon really came into himself in the finals. He gave me a bit of sort of Andrew Wigginsy last year, not quite as good, but that physicality, the shooting, the defense. He had the sort of dog as well, where he was sort of like mouthing off some of the guys that he'd guarded throughout the playoffs. I quite liked that. So, and you look, I'm looking at the competition in the West. The Phoenix Suns need to get themselves together. The Golden State Warriors need to get themselves together. The competition may not be too stiff, and I think they play like, I'd say probably in terms of champions over the last couple of years, they have the most, I think, repeatable qualities about them, apart from sort of like the Golden State Warriors maybe a couple of years ago with KD. I think there's a lot left in the tank, so be around. That doesn't guarantee a championship every year, but I would expect at least another one, and they'll be in and around it for the next couple of years.
I mean, when you look, and obviously this is just how I'll round this off before we jump into the bracket. But when you look at Denver's contracts and the amount of money they've got some of these players locked in for years, obviously things change. This was their first one. It's always going to be, quote unquote, the hungriest they're going to be is to win that first title. The hard part comes if you can get back-to-backs and if you can do it 3 times in a row and however many times after that. But when you look at sort of the core group, and this Denver team didn't really go more than 7 or 8 deep at any real point within the playoffs. Jokic, Murray, MPJ, Aaron Gordon, and KCP are all locked up until 2025. So if they can keep that core together with the mindset of going back and getting another one and another 2, it will, apart from Jeff Green, that core is going to be there for them still. It will be the case of one. I still think going into this year, even though they was number 1 seed, people do look at Denver as like, oh, they overachieved in the regular season and they won't do it in the playoffs. Whereas next year now it's going to be completely different. There is a whole mindset and a shift around. I hate the word aura, but there is now like a championship aura within this Denver team. And Nikola Jokic now isn't a regular season MVP. He has now shown that he had another step to go on of what he did in the NBA Finals. So I agree. I think in terms of how they're set up and what they can do, you can't count out the fact that this Denver team could quite easily go and win 2 or even 3 in a row. Just for how they're built and also the competition around them, it does seem like there is a sizable chunk in quality and class between the rest of them. But obviously in the NBA, a lot of things happen very quickly and who knows what will happen. But that's how I see it. Have either of you got anything else you want to say on this before we jump into the bracket?
I mean, you could have said that they would be in this window or this contention if Jamal Murray isn't out for 2 years, 2 seasons basically with the ACL. So that's the caveat here. Is
that's the caveat.
Yeah, I would say as well though, when you looked at the roster construction 2 years ago to now, it's miles better now than it was then. Yeah, I know Jokic and Murray as well, because his playmaking was on show this playoffs, do elevate these players, but they do have to buy in, one, and also be at a higher level. And that's what players like Aaron Gordon and Bruce Brown have managed to do. I don't think they had a couple of years ago. And then looking at the level of competition, I do expect the Suns to be making some pretty big moves. So I do think they'll be their stiffest competition next year. And I'd be interested to see how that goes, especially if they match up. But that is prospecting quite far into the future. So I'll leave that alone.
It's primarily that their core group of their five starters, they're all going to be, apart from KCP who's 30, they're all going to be under 30 even within 3 years' time. So it's very exciting at the moment for Denver, is how we see it. In any case, let's jump over and let's review the bracket and let's react to. In fact, if we're going to go from here, let's react to our NBA brackets of the playoffs. Well, take a look at what we said way back when the play-ins hadn't. I think we did it before the play-ins had started as well, if I'm right, because I'm sure some of the teams that we're going to have here play different people in the opening round because of it. But we'll take a look at what we said and also, obviously, what happened and just see how far off or correct we were. So we'll jump into. I'll share this instead. So this is just a general bracket of the of what happened from ESPN. Is how we're going to take this. So Milwaukee, Miami, Cleveland, New York, Philly, Brooklyn, Boston, Atlanta. This seems. I don't know about you. This seems so long ago. I'm trying to actually think when these games first took place, but it seems, especially like the Cleveland, New York series, to me seems ages ago. Denver, Minnesota, Phoenix, LA, the Kings v the Warriors, and the Grizzlies v the Lakers. So if we pull up the NBA Pick'em bracket challenge, so I'll share this here. So we had Denver beating the Timberwolves in the first round in 5 from the West side, and then we had the Suns and the Clippers in 5 as well. So we scroll down to the West. Denver 4-1. Denver 4-1. I've got to say, should we just end it there and just congratulate ourselves now and just say, job well done.
Yeah,
We're unbelievable predicting the NBA.
I think the first round was. I think we got one wrong. Maybe, I don't know. I'll have to go back.
What,
and remember. I think the first round was. No, not scores as well. We definitely did not get all the scores right bar one, but it was a pretty easy bracket to predict at the start. It was after that where it just is an absolute mess.
Right, so we had Denver in 5 against the Timberwolves, which we got correct, and then we had the Suns in 5 against the Lakers, which we also got correct. I think that is in itself. I know you're saying that's easy to do, Howard. I don't think that's necessarily that easy, if I'm going to be completely honest for it.
No, getting the scores ain't. Yeah, I get.
No,
right there.
But we'll move on down into the next part. So then we had the Golden State Warriors in 7, and we had. Did we have them in 6? Yeah, we had them in 7. Did we say 6? Yeah, sorry, that's where it says it here. All right, so hang on, I messed up from that part. So we didn't get the Suns and the Clippers correct. If we see here, we had them in 6, and it was in 5. So maybe we'll retract the getting ahead of ourselves for that reason. And then we had them in 6, and it went into 7 games. Yeah, I think that when we was talking about that game, I'm pretty confident if we had it down in 6, we would have been debating if it was going to go 7, not if it was going to go 5 and it went 6. I can't even remember what we would have said for that.
I'm sure I said Sacramento in 7 for that. I'd have to go back and check.
Yeah,
but I remember doing a 7 and making it a 7.
Yeah, it was probably just a case of we thought they'd win the last game on their home court, so we just went with 6. That's usually how it goes. You think they'll steal a game if it's the team that hasn't got a home court advantage. You think they'll steal a game and win it in 6.
Yeah, and then we also had the Lakers v the Grizzlies. We had the Lakers going through in 7, but it was actually in 6, is what I believe is what we've said. Am I right in saying that? Yeah, but so that's what we had for that. But ultimately, apart from missing out on one game from the series scores, we've done pretty well there, is what I'd say on the West side. Now, let's scroll on down to the East, where the first of the terrible picks happened. But I also would argue, I'm pretty confident. I would say 90% of people would say the Bucks were going to be beating the Heat. Maybe that's even a conservative estimate there. But obviously, the big upset of the NBA playoffs was the Miami Heat beating the Bucks in the first round. Would you say 90% of people would have said?
I'm not sure if, because we've done this before the play-in, so I expected the Heat to be playing the Celtics, as that's how it would have shaken up. I think it would have said to be playing it.
I think it would have said first round, but I do remember whatever we said, is we had them in 4.
I mean, we would have, yeah.
I think we said we had the Bucks in 4 of whoever they played, but if it was Miami, we said they'd get 1. I think that's what we said. I'm pretty confident that's what we said. So even then, it was Miami. We weren't giving them too much credit. But obviously, if we take a look at it, it wasn't the case. The Bucks got 1 and Miami got 4. That's how that transpired. So yeah, all right, that's a big L for the record there. We'll jump back into this one. We had the Knicks going through. Did we say the Knicks to beat the Cavs in 5?
No, we said the Cavs. We said the Cavs.
Oh yeah, we had the Cavs. Yeah, we had the Cavs. Sorry, that's what I'm going for here.
Yeah,
we had the Cavs to get through in 6, and the Knicks got through in 5. So that is a big blunder. I mean, the ultimate of that series there as well was that Donovan Mitchell didn't really turn up in what we was expecting.
I mean, basically the Cavs' offense was beyond putrid. Is what that series was.
Yeah, that was a big learning series, I think, for Cleveland and how they're going to operate going forward. And it threw up a lot of question marks with Donovan Mitchell and his links to New York in any case. But that's in comparison to the West, we literally picked the 2 teams that didn't get through in that side of the bracket. Now it's lovely to see some lovely green here. We had Philly in 4. Obviously that happened. And then we had Boston in 6, and we had Boston in 6. In hindsight, I don't know what's happened there. In hindsight, having the Celtics drop 2 games to Atlanta is quite mad, I feel.
Yeah, but they still won. So
I'm
I saw Trey tweeted us next or something on Twitter, so he won't be surprised that they've got 2 off Boston because he's got big aspirations next season.
Yeah, I'm sure this would have been if we were thinking that the Heat were playing here, which I think is probably a bit more understandable. But
so
that didn't turn out either way.
You're saying we lucked into this pick? Is that what you're saying?
I think we did. That. Yeah, I think we did.
Right. Okay. Well, I don't think we lucked into this one. We'll stay down here. I'm pretty confident we then assumed that Boston and Philly, obviously how we've got them down, would be going through. And we said Boston in 6, and it got taken all the way to 7, and it should have been Philly in. I don't even want to talk about it and what happened and the transpiring of it. But I think that was the most of all the playoffs, even the finals and the conference finals for me. And again, I can be a bit biased in these situations here, but genuinely, I think that was the most entertaining series of the playoffs. I did like Kings Warriors, but for me, Kings Warriors was good. But and obviously it is a sort of classic in that regard. But Sixers Celtics was a very good series this year.
Philly choke job at the end is absolutely unreal.
Okay, we don't need to paint it in that light.
There's a million narratives going through that as well, but I think I agree. I think King Warriors was probably and stand alone the rest of the lot.
Kings Warriors is really good.
I like Lakers Warriors as well, actually.
Yeah.
See, that didn't live up to it for me.
Because they got roundly battered, but it was quite.
Yeah, it was entertaining. Yeah,
roundly battered. Did you just say
roundly? Just like in every facet, basically.
Right. In any case, we'll scrub back up. So then we had it being Bucks v Cleveland, and that wasn't the case. It was Miami v the Knicks. So in that side of things, just horrendous of how we was going to pick it there. I'm not sure who we would have picked out of Miami v Knicks as well. I really don't know. I think we'd have ended up going, to be honest, I think off a regular season, we probably would have gone Knicks. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, I think we would have gone Knicks. I'm not sure though.
I mean, if it was a first rounder, maybe, but after the Miami Heat beat the Bucks, I was kind of like, yeah, they're probably going to beat the Knicks.
Yeah, I'll say as well. Knicks Heat might have been the single worst series of all time. So I'm glad that did.
Some putrid basketball would have been on display for it. But in any case, it is what it was. We got that one wrong. You take that on the chin. We got this whole side wrong. When you get the first 2 right, when you get the first 2 right on one side and the first 2 wrong, you're going to have to take that on the chin and deal with it. We'll scroll back up to the West. Obviously, moving on here, we had Golden State Warriors be the Lakers. And I think we had... I assume from how this bracket has gone, we said Lakers in 6, and it wasn't. It was Golden State in 6. Is that what we had there? From looking at it, I'd assume that's what.
No, it's the Lakers won, mate.
Oh, sorry, it's our bracket we're going for. I'm reading it wrong. I'm reading it wrong. So we had the Warriors going through here.
Yeah.
In hindsight, again,
I
Is
think
this-
we cut them some slack because they're the Warriors, to be honest.
Yeah.
I remember, I can't remember if I did, but I did really want to pick the Lakers for this one.
Yeah, I think we ignored some red flags with the Warriors, really. I mean, I didn't because I think I had them out in the first round, but if it was going to go through here, I think I probably did say the Warriors just because we didn't really have much to go off on the Lakers thing, I would say. We had I'd say 15 games off the end of the season. I think they took it up another level in the playoffs. AD didn't get injured, which was a big thing. So, have to take that one on chin. But this one I'm not taking on the chin because I said Denver would go through. Sorry.
You did say
Yeah,
you was the one man fighting against me and Lewis here, and I will play the card of that. I think me and Lewis was waiting on Phoenix to be a bit better, and after 10 games, they're going to be a bit better. Than it is.
I was kind of sold, to be honest, and I'm sure you know what.
Nope, Lewis is in such shock that he's frozen in time. Oh, he's back now.
Yeah. So it was so wrong. The mindset just started to cut me out for the entirety of that. But yeah, I basically said I thought the two best players on Phoenix to be able to carry them over the line. That was absolutely not the case.
Yeah. They drove them closest anyone did, in fairness.
Yeah, they did. And Devin Booker was immense for most of those games. So pretty credit to him. People on the Suns that weren't immense.
You're right in saying it. Are we gonna talk about two relatively disappointing playoff appearances now from Kevin Durant in a row? Is that a narrative?
Oh, we will do. I mean, maybe not today, but we will do. I think at some stage.
Yeah, but KD's a made man, so
yeah.
Is he
he's a made man, but he's not the bus driver.
He's a made man.
Oh, he's not the bus
driver.
driver.
There you go. Yeah, you can shut him out, but at the end of the day, he's still one of the best players ever. So.
Yeah.
Right. We'll stay up here for the Western Conference Finals. Obviously, it was Denver v. the Lakers, and they got swept. And we put the Suns v. the Warriors, so we couldn't have been more wrong if we tried. And we had that going 7 games, so it was the complete opposite. We actually could not have been more wrong on that. We went for a 7-game series instead of a sweep, and the 2 teams incorrect from that. So make sure you do subscribe for groundbreaking NBA tips and predictions ready for next year. And we'll scroll on down also to the Eastern Conference Finals, where we had the Bucks with the Celtics, and it was not that. It was Boston.
This would have happened anyway, to be honest.
What do you think? So you thought, would it have happened? We did say 7.
I do think if
but I'm not sure we can class that for it.
It's a big what if, it's all sort of butterfly effect. I do think if Giannis doesn't get injured, they probably get through and they probably get to the finals. But, it's all sort of, up in the air. I'm not going off of anything. It's just my thoughts.
I thought you was going to be a lot more smug about picking Denver in the over Phoenix. That was your main. I remember your main calls being the Kings to beat the Warriors and Denver to get all the way through. That's what I remember.
Yeah, but I didn't have Denver winning, did I?
You didn't have Denver winning. But I remember me and Lewis were very similar throughout in terms of our picks. But you were on your own. You were that one angry man in a room.
I said Memphis to get through as well.
Cheers.
Actually, I said Memphis to get through, which was an absolute L, and their main man is out. Probably for 30 games next season. So.
Yeah, but it could have been a toy gun. We're not going to debate that. It could have been a toy gun. Who knows?
Maybe we'll know now it's over.
That's what. To be fair, I wonder when we're going to get that news. Actually,
give it a week.
Yeah, you got to give them a couple of days at least. And then we had it being Phoenix v the Bucks, and it wasn't that at all. It was Denver v Miami. So. Again, just make sure you hit that. Hit the bell notification to make sure you stay in touch with all of our picks, readying up for Summer League and then the new regular season. So, but I mean, these bracket challenges, they're normally just a bit of fun. They're very, very hard to predict.
We've been better in previous years.
Yeah, this might be the worst. This might be the worst one ever.
Do you think this is the worst one? I mean, the Bucks going out early.
For us, I think it is.
The Bucks going out early. I mean, what? So we got 6 of 16 in round 1, 1 of 8 in the semis, 0-4, 0-2. I don't know.
That is terrible.
That is bad.
I don't know how it's necessary. We were 6,275th in the world. Out of how many? Gonna see. Oh, it's going to be 9.
Yeah, you're going to be scrolling for a while.
I'll be scrolling for a little while there.
Well done to Sunny 617 though.
Yeah, he's getting a trip to New York for a regular season game for him and a friend. That's pretty good. In comparison to if you come second, you just get an NBA pass.
What if he lives in New York? What do they do then? Or is this a purely European?
I don't know actually. I don't think it's just Europeans. So, but I mean, if he lives in New York, we live near London. If you want a 5-star hotel trip to
Maybe
London,
lives in
you're still gonna-
Manhattan. Yeah, maybe lives in Manhattan. He can go to Barclays.
Yeah, you can get
That's the trip
MSG
that
or
he gets.
Barclays. That's the one that you want. But no, yeah, well done to Sonny G17. We know you're watching this. So, but if you are if Sonny G17 watches this video, please put a comment down below because that would just be hilarious for it. But yeah, I mean, these are a bit of fun. We always do these each year, and we'll do our next season predictions. Obviously, way closer to when the season starts. We're going to be doing a load of stuff around fixing NBA players, fixing NBA rosters, and all of this stuff in the off season. But they're always just a little bit of fun to sit down and do. Now, let's get back to something. Where am I going? I'm going to put this picture back up of the NBA Finals MVP Nikola Jokic as I find the list of which of the questions I was going to ask some of you boys. So, in any case, looking back now at the playoffs as a whole, I want to know, and I asked these questions to the boys ahead of the podcast so they could come up with some better answers and not on the spot and come up with their real in-depth analysis that these two have of the beautiful game of basketball. So, Lewis Howard, I want to know who your 3 biggest winners of the NBA playoffs are. Now, I said to them that this can be a coach, a team, a player, anything, anyone. Could even be like Stephen A if he secured the bag. Who do you feel are your 3 big NBA playoff winners?
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you now, there's not going to be much in-depth analysis here, but I thought about picking some rogue ones, and I would have if I didn't go first, but I'm going first, so I'm just going to pick from the Nuggets. Number 1, first and foremost, I think I have to just say Jokic because he vindicated those 2 MVPs before. People didn't want to give him the one this year because of the fact that he hadn't done anything in the postseason. Well, now we've seen him in the postseason, and he's done something that no one's ever done before. He was the Finals MVP, and I think, as you say, how people view Denver will have now changed for the next few years onwards, especially while he's there. So I think you have to put him in. I also think another one that you have to put in is Jamal Murray, purely because of what he's been through over the past few years, obviously with his ACL surgery and coming back from that, and now to go all the way to the finals. And I would say he played very well. He showed that he can be a great playmaker when he needs to be, a great scorer when he needs to be, and play at a star level next to Jokic being that superstar player. So I've got to give a massive shout out to him. And the last one, I went back and forth with a couple of people. I decided to just go with Aaron Gordon for my third one because I think he really showed that with any NBA player who's maybe sort of around his level, when you get put in a situation where everyone, the coaching staff, the players believe in you and you fully accept your role, you can have a massive impact and, even game-winning impacts like he did when he had that 27-6-6 game in the finals to contribute to a team. And I just think he deserves his flowers for that, for playing a role like a backup center. He had to play a lot of the time and he had to be the primary defender on a lot of the other team's best players. So for me, I think I have to give him a shout out there. There's a load more you can go through, but they're just the 3 I went for.
Yeah, I went for more broad, not within the same team.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to go for one, though. I have to mention Jamal Murray because I just don't think we were thinking or really talking about him before the playoffs began. And obviously there's the whole sort of bubble Murray meme type of thing where he just went haywire then, and we haven't really seen him since because of the big injury. But I think in my estimations, in stocks, in terms of like value, if you think of like sort of trade value, like who is the most, I think you put Jokic like either top 1 or 2 at this moment in time. But I feel like Jamal Murray rose up that probably more than any other player in the playoffs. Really, there's some other ones.
I can think of one who I left out that maybe if one of you don't say, I'll chuck out an honorable mention too. But yeah, he's definitely up
there. So I'll go for him because I think it's a great story as well. Because he's talked about how grateful he was that they remained patient with him. He said he went up to Stan Kroenke, who's a man I know all too well, and it was thank you for being. It was just quite a nice moment. My next one's going to be Eric Spoelstra, and I know that seems a bit strange because it's now like I'm not sure what his finals record is. It might be sort of like 50-50 at this stage because I know he won the one with he didn't coach the Wade Shaq one. I think that was Pat Riley, but he's got the couple with LeBron, and that's it. I think there's probably more losses than wins there, but I just think the job he done with that team to get them as far as he did with that group of players was just remarkable. And I just think that is largely down to due to his coaching. I don't think coaching usually has that much of a big impact in NBA games, but in that case, when you're seeing Joe Mazzulla across the aisle from him, and you're seeing him, it's just a difference in authority and like know-how and just intelligence of the game. So I have to put him in there. I've got a couple that's ringing around my head here. I'll just go for, I think, the Lakers, and maybe more specifically Rob Pelinka, because I wasn't expecting them to go as far as they did. So that's really on me in terms of my expectations. I thought they won pretty big, get into the conference finals. I know it was a sweep, but from where they were at the beginning of the season, the bad vibes around that team, and how even if those players maybe didn't contribute, that mid-season trades that they did, maybe they didn't contribute as much as, say, someone who was already there, like Austin Reeves. I think, just getting the players out that they needed to and getting some more guys in. And at times, I was thinking they may give the Nuggets a run for their money. So I think that's a far improvement from where they were at the beginning of the season. So I'm gonna go for that. So Jamal Murray, Eric Spoelstra, and Rob Pelinka.
And even when they got swept, most of those games were potentially winnable. So there is some context to that. And I would say that is the player I was thinking of when you said draft stock or like up and down. I think Austin Reeves has probably had the biggest one because he's about to get an unbelievable paycheck from what he was thinking about at the start of the season.
Yeah, I'll keep mine short and sweet because we've got a couple of these we're going to run through. So, I mean, number one, I don't really think you can look past Nikola Jokic. It's the ultimate story of that he's done it in the regular season. Everyone's like, well, he's got to do it in the playoffs. And I mean, I'm not really sure he could have done much more to what he's done in comparison to where people were saying, all right, if you're going to do this in the regular season, what can you do in the playoffs? He'll have silenced everybody, including myself. In terms of the debates on, I don't want to get stuck on the thing of Embiid v Jokic, as it's not as if, and I've seen some of this on Twitter now in terms of people were like, oh, he's got robbed for the regular season MVP in the full clean sweep. I do think that talk is a little bit, it's easy to look now in hindsight and go, he did this well in the playoffs, this is what he did in the regular season, leave it there. He's like that whole thing, you couldn't have argued who would have won it. I feel it could have gone to either of them. There might have been a sympathy side of it that did go on Embiid's factor, but it's how it happened. How Jokic has performed across the playoffs, and especially in the finals, as being the first man ever, I think, to lead the finals in points, rebounds, and assists. That is a all-time historic.
He didn't lead the finals in assists. It was just the entire.
Did he not? Oh, I thought he won it. I thought he had. Oh, was it just the entire playoffs?
Yeah, and Jamal Murray averaged more assists than he did in the finals.
I did see Jamal Murray had I did see Jamal Murray drop like 10, 12, 10, 12. And then when Nathan picked him to get a double-double, obviously don't do that. But, so Nikola Jokic for me is the obvious clear winner of the NBA playoffs. In second place, in light of the talk of Austin Reeves, my one is going to go to Caleb Martin. I feel in terms of his general playoff performances, especially when Miami lost Hero, he was, I'd argue, stepped up more relative to what his expectations were than Bam Adebayo did. I'd say at points he was the second guy in that Miami team across points. And considering the context around it of getting cut by Michael Jordan and everything that's come on it, I think Caleb Martin is a big old winner. And in lieu of Austin Reeves getting that fat paycheck, that man has a $7 million player option next year from making this run in the playoffs and in the finals. If he plays somewhat decently in the regular season next year, that man's declining that option because he's going to get more than $7 million across years in his next contract, especially because he'd be 28 at that time. And then my third and final winner is someone that's already been mentioned but wasn't mentioned as a winner. I think Stan Kroenke. That man is now dominating in all sports apart from one. But who knows in terms of the next few years what Stan Kroenke will do with Arsenal. But I mean, in terms of MLB, in terms of the NHL and the NBA, the man is NFL. Sorry, the man is the man's winning. No, you
So
seem
we
a bit
on to-
upset there when you talk about
Yeah,
winning.
no,
and
no.
staying
Yeah, it's just Arsenal next soon come, mate.
Yeah, it's more
Um,
difficult. It's more difficult in non-American sports.
Yeah.
Well, it's a nice transition talking about Arsenal because we'll move on to the biggest losers of the playoffs. Louis, who are your three biggest losers of the playoffs?
Yeah, I didn't do this as biggest losers or biggest winners, but I'm trying to go a bit unique so we don't all have the same one, so we can cover a bit of ground. Jokic would be my biggest winner if I was doing that, but
yeah,
I'm going to leave out a pretty big loser, as I feel like either one of you will go in on him at some stage. I have to go for one. I have to go for Joel Embiid is definitely one of the biggest losers because I know you mentioned about the whole MVP debate, and I agree. It's kind of a retrospective thing. When the regular season's over, I think I've won it. Like I think Jokic should have won it, but that's kind of irrespective now. I just think his playoff performance is what we should be talking about, and it just wasn't really good enough. And I think it's just a case of every season he's just not healthy enough to impact the game, but also he just doesn't command the level of gravity. He doesn't make his teammates better enough, I guess, when it comes to this stage of the game. And I think it's not just on him. I think James Harden was pretty horrific when it comes at certain stages and really good at other stages. Tyrese Maxey isn't ready. But I think in terms of stocks, he had some pretty high approval ratings. I don't think anyone really went for him for his sort of playoff resume before this. But he's 30 now, and I think people will start talking about it a lot more, and maybe that becomes a bit of a talking point in terms of his future in Philadelphia. So that's one I'll go for. Another one I have to go for is Ja Morant, purely because he wasn't very good in the first round. The Grizzlies really disappointed as opposed to their maybe expectations they had from last year, where they gave the Warriors a good series. He said in the season, I'm okay in the West. It's just quite funny. It is just quite funny. It's not as funny that if he's going for sort of like this emotional crisis type of thing, but I looking sort of like with a bit of space and time, I'm not sure if he deserves like a 40-game ban. I think it's probably just going to come hard because he just done it so closely after another sort of really bad incident before. So, but I think it's more the case of that. Maybe I could put this as like a Grizzlies type of thing because, you're looking at last year and you think, they're coming up. The future's pretty bright in Memphis, and maybe it's thrown a little bit into doubt, really now. My last one is going to be, it's one between two. I'll just go Julius Randle because he'd recovered a lot of the stock that he'd built back up in New York after a terrible last season, after a terrible playoffs before. It just came crumbling down again. I know he was injured in some of those games, and some of those games he was good in, but I just think the Knicks faithful I don't think they'll accept him back now, and I think that'll be sort of. He might be there next season. I'm not saying he's going to get traded in the off season, but I certainly think they'll be looking for ways to move him on at some stage because we know what his ceiling is now, and he's just not a very good playoff performer. So those are my three ones, but I'll leave Jaylen Brown and Boston Celtics and everyone involved in that to someone else.
All right, yeah. Maybe George will have something to say about them because I didn't have any of them down, to be honest. Shall I jump in next?
Yeah, take the reins.
Yeah, I will say I'll change it because I obviously don't want to have the same, but I did have Embiid as one of mine, which I thought was a bit harsh, to be honest, because I do think, as Louis said, the health was a factor, but I don't think you can ignore the gravitas of winning the MVP and then the way they lost and the manner they lost in the end. You just can't ignore that. But two people wrote themselves immediately outside of Embiid that I have to mention. I went for a Grizzlies player, as Louis said. I thought Morant, just because it was more of off the court stuff with Ja away from basketball, I decided to stay away from that. We're talking about the biggest losers here. I tried to keep it more basketball related. So I went with Dylan Brooks because all the memes and things that came about
were more
basketball related. So I thought I'd give him the nod.
That's how long. That is how long the playoffs feel. I've forgotten all about Dylan Brooks.
But I think Giles an option much for Dylan Brooks. Chatting to LeBron and then falling as flat as he did, and then it comes out straight away that the Grizzlies aren't going to re-sign him, which I think is shocking on the part of the Grizzlies, I will say. And he is going to land somewhere else. But Just that whole
the talk of him going China's rubbish. He'll get in the NBA still. Like he was good in the regular season. Yeah, it's just the memes.
Yeah, that whole turn of events and how he was just put on blast for social media.
That is, there's that Twitter thread of the what's the biggest I'm not him moment. It's the talking about LeBron and then getting absolutely smashed by him.
That had to be an inclusion for me. He was number one for me, to be honest. And then at number two, I think I had to put Doc Rivers as well. I know you're talking about Embiid, but I went with Doc Rivers because it's just this. There's been a lot of times now in the playoffs recently where, especially if it was a game, it had to be a Game 7 loss as well, of course. That he's just fallen at the final hurdle, and then he obviously got fired as well. So this is pretty cutthroat, the ones I'm picking out here. But there was
so many more names are popping into my head. I'll wait till George is finished, but I want a couple honourable pops. It's fun of doing the negative ones. I don't know.
Can you imagine Louis, the professional hater he is, enjoying the three big losers that come out there?
And then the third one, as I said, I did have Embiid. I thought about DeAndre Ayton as well, but I actually think the Suns are going to rally behind him next season. I think he's going to end up staying, so it might not be too bad for him in the future. But he obviously had his issues in the playoffs. And then I was just going to say the Cavs as a whole, because I just think they played so absolutely terribly in that series against the Knicks, especially offensively, that it was just a major letdown.
Yeah, understandable. I again can't really argue with any of those picks. I'll run through my three now. One of them is being Doc Rivers. I think putting Joel Embiid, I can understand the sentiment and the fundamental arguments behind putting Embiid in there. I wouldn't say he's in the top three biggest losers. I would say that you can't win MVP and then go out in the second round. But I wouldn't say he was like catastrophically bad. He was just under what people were expecting. There was a few games.
There was a couple games where it was catastrophically
There was a couple of
bad,
games. I wouldn't say catastrophically bad. It was more of the
Game 7. He was catastrophically bad. Like that was all the time stinker. But as I said, he's definitely not. He was definitely not. To me, so that is going out.
To me, it was more Doc Rivers getting out coached by Joe Mazzulla. For me, it was you can't allow that to happen across the 7 game series.
I'd have had Doc Rivers over him as well.
Yeah,
I told you I had him number 2. So.
My second... Oh, go on, Nick.
In contrast, is Ben Simmons a big winner of
No, Ben Simmons he's an big winner
because we're getting the regular classic Ben Simmons, I'm in the gym posts in LA where he's looking swole. In about 2 weeks' time, we'll be getting shots of him draining from the logo, and then you'll never see him ever do it again. In any case, my second biggest loser, and again, I'm trying to go a little bit off field here just to pick some different ones, but I do think it's a viable answer. It's the basic fundamental, and it is the man that put this whole thing together of when will they get healthy. Steve Ballmer is a massive loser in this NBA playoffs. Again, another season for the Clippers where their big investments just aren't healthy, and they're never going to be, unfortunately. And it's always going to be the case of if they were together and if they were playing healthy, what could have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard done together? And look, there's still some time for it to happen, but off of the track record that we've seen, the levels of optimism have got to be near on the floor right now for them ever to realistically get a chance of both of them being at 100% health and 100% form and readiness at the same time. It just doesn't look like it's ever going to happen. So considering what, one, they're paying, and two, they gave up, it is looking like a big L for Mr. Steve Ballmer. But he has got the arena with the most toilets now in the NBA on the horizon. So every cloud in that for Ballmer. And then my number one biggest loser, I feel for me, I'm not surprised it hasn't been spoken about, maybe because it's from Louis' side, but it is the entirety of the Minnesota Timberwolves front office. I think they're the biggest losers of the NBA playoffs, because what you saw was an absolute star breaking through in Anthony Edwards, and he is being stalwart by the worst trade in NBA history for that Rudy Gobert plank to stand in his way. Granted, there are things that they can now do, and they can maybe move Karl Anthony Towns to the Knicks, and there's some stuff that's going to come about with that. But in terms of what that could have done, and I know that series would have been dusted for them anyway, but that trade is looking like the worst trade of all time for what they've got Anthony Edwards for now and what they've done for him.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say about that is it's more of a season thing than the playoffs. Yeah. I feel like first round they're just losing to Denver anyway, regardless of the situation.
We had as good a
Go on,
performance as the Miami Heat did. We done better than the
it's
Lakers
true.
did in
It's better
fairness.
than the Lakers, yeah. So that's why I wouldn't put them in this purely because I don't think looking at the playoffs in isolation. I will say if you want to say it in the sense that because you saw Anthony Edwards play so well, you then just kept getting reminded of what had happened, then maybe you can make that argument. But for me, I think that's more of a season-long issue that was put on show maybe a bit in the playoffs. But they played Denver anyway. So.
I will say it's quite funny because the guy who made that trade also built the Denver Nuggets roster that just won a championship. But swings and roundabouts, I guess. Honorable mentions: D'Angelo Russell, absolutely horrific. Jordan Poole, not great.
Jordan Poole's a good shout.
He might be gone as well. So.
CP3 just got waived, which is it wasn't really due to poor performance. He had some good games, but that has to be something.
I think if you were going to pick from the Suns, I think you go Ayton. I mean, maybe you can make the case for Monty Williams as well because he got fired.
But that's true. But he's also got a bag. He's got a 75 million contract.
I don't think. I don't think Monty Williams is the shout there. It'd be Ayton if anyone from the Suns.
And my last, but not by least mention, is poor Bernie, the Miami Heat mascot, who I'm took a blow from Conor McGregor the other day. So those would be my honourable mentions there. But
you would have thrown up on how he wasn't even in the playoffs, but Zion's an option.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, Zion, that's off court antics to a whole.
I was talking about not including off court. That is absolutely as far away from basketball as it could have got. So.
Yeah. In any case. We won't ask. Well, nice little segue actually in terms of the biggest surprise package of the playoffs. This is probably the surprise that Mariah Hills found out on Zion's off. But what did you have down as your biggest surprise package of the playoffs?
I think it's the obvious one, the easy one, but there isn't really another option. It is the Miami Heat getting to the NBA Finals and knocking off the 1 seed in the Bucks, the 2 seed in the Celtics. Like literally, you talk about the brackets before. And how screwed up ours was. Every single person's bracket screwed up there isn't a Miami Heat fan who might have potentially got them going to the finals. But you just can't speak in it. And it did end unceremoniously in the finals, obviously. But you can't speak highly enough of the job Eric Spoelstra's done and the players that stepped up in those series. Jimmy obviously had a massive series against the Bucks, maybe petered off a bit as the playoffs went on. But you have to just take this playoffs as a positive for them because no one expected them to do as well as they did.
In the absence of choosing the Heat, which would be my one as well, I'll just say Austin Reeves, who we've mentioned before, but I just wasn't really clued up on before the playoffs. I just thought he was like a white guy shooter type of overrated Lakers role player type of thing because that's kind of, they overrate their players, it's fine. But he is good. Like, he's really good. He can initiate offense. At times, I do think LeBron James should have given him the ball a little bit more, which is saying something. So, and he's about to get himself a mighty big bag if he doesn't stay up today, because I can't see him doing it. But I think a lot of teams will be wanting a guy like him come the off season. So that would be my biggest surprise, just because I wasn't aware that he could go. He was at this level basically.
Yeah. I mean, there's some other options of which I could probably think of, but I do think it is just the Miami Heat, and there isn't really. I think there's quite a sizable gap in terms of surprise packages. No one would have had them making the finals, let alone maybe even getting out the first round. So it's more of what that collective group has done, and it's every single one of them. Like, every single one of those players had a game. Like, even Kyle Lowry had a couple of games against the Knicks where he was really good again. And people thought Kyle Lowry is not dusted and washed, but way beyond what he was capable of doing that in the playoffs again, especially with all his knee issues. So, yeah, and just in general, the whole sort of bundle package of the Miami Heat are clearly, I think, the biggest surprise of the playoffs. On the flip side of that, what did you have down as the biggest letdown of the playoffs? Louis, I'll go to you first for this one.
It's got to be the Bucks, because we thought they were going to win the championship.
Were they a failure? Yeah. As we're going to get Giannis going on this now.
Yeah. I think we discussed it after he'd done that, but yeah, they were. They lost to the 8th seed. I know he was injured in a couple of those games, and maybe he shouldn't have even been playing in the series. But I mean, he was damn good when he came back. Let's not lie. But I think even without him, they should have had enough to at least make it sort of semi-competitive. But the nature of that series, the gentleman sweep, guys who I sort of really held in high esteem. Brook Lopez was just a defensive monster the whole season. Drew Holiday, I'd put him up against anyone sort of one-on-one defensively, but he was getting torched. So that there was just like small downwards sort of like falling stocks in those types of things for me. I am interested to see how they'll operate with a new coach, someone who makes, sort of more adjustments, I guess, rather than playing through like a philosophy like Bud did. I know that got them to one NBA championship, but I do think they needed something new. So that'll be interesting to see. But I think just from a pure standpoint, if we predicted the Bucks to win the championship and they go out the first round to the 8th seed, they have to be the biggest letdown.
Yeah, I agree. I think it has to be the Bucks. I know we've maybe offered up some other alternatives, but with this one, it needs to be given to the credence it deserves because it was so bad. We were talking about biggest losers before. I think the reason why we avoid the Bucks in that is because we think they'll be back next year. They'll probably be a top 2-3 seed in the East, and we would expect them to be all right in the playoffs if we're expecting now. But in terms of just looking at it as a pure letdown, you have to throw them in it because, as you said, we had such high expectations for them. Even though, as you say, there were some complications with Giannis and in injuries, they should still have enough to beat the 8th seed. We've seen it before where they've managed to pick themselves up facing adversity, but this time they just couldn't get it over the line. Maybe we're starting to see some cracks in the armour with some of their players, which could be a worry for the future. But just looking at it in isolation now, I think you have to say the Bucks.
You had Drew Holiday talking about retirement after that series, which was a bit nuts. But again, I mean, lots of players. I don't want to talk about LeBron James here, but lots of players maybe go a bit hyperbole, in terms of after taking a loss in the playoffs. For me, there's three options, and all of them, unfortunately, have, I would argue, valid excuses with them. It is the Bucks, but the valid excuse is that Giannis was injured. It is Joel Embiid, but the excuse is he wasn't healthy when playing in that Celtics series. He was disappointing. And also, I will say Kevin Durant. There were expectations put on Kevin Durant to come into this Suns team and then to instantly challenge. But again, the valid excuse being 15 games or so they played beforehand. So there's three. All of them, I feel everyone was let down in one way or another by their performances. I don't know what one I could categorically class as number one. I feel like if you're going to look at it at a quantifiable amount, then yeah, it's obvious that the Bucks losing as the first seed to the 8th seed would be that option. But it depends. If you look at it as Joel Embiid as the current season MVP, to go out in the way he did was a big letdown. And then Kevin Durant, maybe not as the extreme with it, but coming on as like this they're finally landed that humongous name. And he wasn't the best player. Like Devin Booker was considerably better than him, I would say, in both of the series that he played. So it was there's different angles to look at all of them, but yeah, it probably is the Bucks, and it's harsh in one light to say that. But if you're going to look at it of the Miami Heat being an 8th seed and a 1 seed, I don't know how many times it's happened in NBA history. It won't be many, but that's got to be the biggest letdown in isolation in the playoffs. And I think that's where we land on it. I don't really think there's too much else to say unless Louis got an honourable mention, and I feel like he's just going to say like Julius Randle because he just doesn't like him or something like that.
No, I don't mind Julius Randle.
What do you think about the Towns for Julius Randle trade? That's what I want to know.
Oh no,
I think it's awful for the Timberwolves. Yeah, that is tragic.
I don't mind the KD shout. I do think there has to be something said of two real big playoff letdowns. I think there is, like you say, a bit of a get out of jail free card with the not many games played, not entirely healthy, that type of thing. But he's not been a bus driver, has he? We've seen other players be a bus driver, and I don't. That term is a bit, Charles Barkley TV type of thing. But it's a fair comment. It's a fair comment. He's the teams where he's won the championships. They are by far the better team. Just like in a talent standpoint, that's just how it is. So, we'd like to see it another time with him.
Yeah. Before we round this podcast stuff up, there's two things I want to say, and they're not going to get into it into too much detail. But I mean, when we were saying earlier that the Bucks should have put up a more competitive showing against the Heat without Giannis. How would you feel the Nuggets would have fared if Jokic had been missing for the same amount of time as Giannis would have? Would you think it would have been in a similar light? Do you think Miami would have just gone through them without Jokic, or do you think the Nuggets still win that series without Jokic? Complete hypothetical, but it just made me thinking about
they're
it.
not winning without Jokic.
You also got to think about
the only. Go on, mate. Go on.
I was just say they don't have like a backup center that's any good either.
Yeah, they're playing Aaron Gordon at the center as backup, and I would also say that these types of conversations, especially when it's a player like a Jokic or like a LeBron, maybe, or a Luka, the team is so centric around that one player, and they impact so many facets of the game that the argument isn't fair when comparing them to maybe some other players. Giannis is probably a bit closer because he also impacts the Bucks massively, but yeah, I just think that kind of conversation can be a bit redundant sometimes because these are players where the franchise is literally building the entire team around them. So obviously, if you take them away, then they're going to be impacted ridiculous amount.
Yeah, I mean, Louis said something silly there. He said that the Denver Nuggets don't have a good backup center, and DeAndre Jordan's getting some slander there for no reason.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, he played 3 minutes in the last game. He played 3 minutes in the last game.
I need to see him with that ring. I need to see him.
I've seen the picture of him with the Larry O'Brien trophy and the ski goggles on, and that was enough for my heart to see that. The other one I want to say, the other thing I did want to say was, in terms of biggest letdown of the playoffs, I didn't put him in the 3 because I thought some of the slander was a bit unnecessary. But do you think it was a bit of a letdown for Jaylen Brown?
I was surprised no one said it.
Yeah, I think he's an option, but it's so up and down that he never like falls to the point where you're like, oh yeah, that he had an absolute stinker the entire time because he didn't. But
he was good in the Atlanta series, but
yeah, as I said, it's up and down, and it obviously brings out the question again of what do the Celtics do with him, because it's not a natural fit. But I still think I've completely derailed this conversation to should the Celtics make a change, but I still think they should be sticking with him because he is still a great NBA player. Maybe shouldn't dribble the ball as much as he does, but he's still a fantastic player. So I wouldn't have him in with the others that we spoke about.
I mean, I'll say for the last 2 seasons, his weaknesses in terms of ball handling have been exploited at the periods that have gone out. Teams get low, they keep him driving to the left. So that's something to be considered. I just think if you ask every other NBA team, would you take Jaylen Brown in like a trade, they would do it. So that's the caveat to it. So that's just my 2 cents anyway.
Yeah, and I would say as well, just quickly, sorry, I think when we look to the Celtics in this postseason, maybe the coaching would be the first thing that would get brought up before we really delved into the players themselves.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the type of conversation we'll have when we go through and we start rebuilding and what changes we would make for teams in the off season. And what we'll do is we'll look at like the teams' contracts, what they've got, picks that they've got, and everything from there. But I feel that the Celtics have got a few more things they could move about to shuffle the pack up. You got your Brogdons that they could trade away, and they can still get some nice pieces back to keep and rebuild alongside a Tatum and a Jaylen Brown. But we'll wrap that one up there. Thank you very much for watching this. If you aren't subscribed to us here on YouTube, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It would help us out more than you could possibly imagine. If you're here and you watch some of the SoRare stuff that I personally do on the NBA side of things, there will be a SoRare video out soon after this one, going over all of the points that I won across the playoffs and talking about the changes that they're going to be doing in the next season. And also, make sure to drop a like on this video and comment because it would help us out in those algos as well. If you're listening to this on the audio side of things, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Podcasts, wherever you get them from, consider hitting that follow button and leaving us a review. A 5-star rating would help us out massively. But that's going to be that. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed the NBA playoffs. Enjoy the little time out, and we'll be back soon to talk about everything that you love in the off season of the NBA. Thanks for watching. Peace.